You're listening to Codepunk with Bill Ahern and Michael Zuhl, a podcast about the intersection between programming, technology, and the digital lifestyle.
How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing pretty good, man. So you seem to be a little bit under the weather. I know we've postponed this recording a little bit, and my children are both sick and starting to get over it. My wife's sick also. So usually all of them get sick at once. So I end up kind of helping out with the kids and helping out with the wife, and then they all get better, and then I get sick, and there's no help on my end. It's kind of like, well, just suck it up, go to work, and do what you need to do when you get home.
Yeah.
So I got to kind of.
That's how it works, man.
Yeah. What are you gonna do, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the same thing.
So we took briefly. We took the kids out to two things. 2 weeks ago on a Saturday, we took them to the Parade of Lights in downtown Harrisonburg, and then this weekend we just took them to see the lights at some lady's house in Ruckersville, Virginia, who does this. She does a light show. It's pretty incredible, and people actually drive to her house and park on her lawn and get out. And they even had food and Santa Claus this year. And both times my daughter got cold, I guess. I don't know, but about halfway through it, she decided that screaming was her best thing to do. So my
Awesome.
wife's, I mean, they're both two, and my wife sometimes gets under this expectation that, we're going to go out and we're going to do this thing and it's going to be perfect. And when you have kids, it's never going to be perfect. So,
Right.
What about you? Anything new on the horizon? I know we attempt to record two sessions, one session a month, 2 episodes, but I know with the holiday, with Thanksgiving and then with Christmas coming up, we've been kind of backed up. We haven't really gotten to it. So there's been quite a gap since the last recording.
Yeah.
Are there any updates on your front?
Yeah. I mean, it's as you mentioned, I'm sick, and my concern is that I'm hoping that we had some black mold, and we had the walls ripped out of our bathroom and our office because just the way the water leaked down. Not much mold in the closet in the office, which is underneath our master bedroom, but there was a lot of black mold in our bathroom, which is obviously very, very bad. So I actually removed that manually, and more than one person said I should probably have a team of professionals do it. But I think I did a good job. I mean, I did my research and, kind of went in there and really scrubbed it, got the right chemicals. One thing I learned, black mold, and obviously this has got nothing to do with programming, but it's interesting to me. You always hear people say use bleach to get rid of black mold.
Right, which is not the case.
Not always the case, no. And we have animals, so that's kind of, you're putting a toxin in the air that could potentially damage your animals. I also discovered that bleach doesn't work as well on porous material.
Right.
So you actually want to use hydrogen peroxide is recommended because it too is a bleaching agent, but isn't toxic like bleach. And then if you want, just to kind of give it a double whammy, follow up with some the highest percentage rubbing alcohol you can get. I found 91%. So I used that combination and really scrubbed it, used a mask, goggles, all that stuff. I think I got it out. So now we're ready to kind of put the wall back. But anyway, my concern is I hope that it's not the black mold that's gotten me sick. I don't believe it is because my wife's been completely fine.
Right.
But that's one of those things where, and I've been sick for 2 weeks. Even my work was like, man, it feels like, because I just started this new job a couple months ago, but they kind of joked and said, it seems like you've been sick the whole time you've been here. I'm like, yeah, it probably does seem like that. But other than that, everything's fine.
Yeah, I was always told when it comes to so when we bought this home, there were a couple things we wanted to check out to make sure there wasn't any mold or anything like that, because we were getting kind of a funky smell initially, and I wasn't sure what it was, and I kept assuming it was mold. It was nothing. I mean, we couldn't even locate it, and eventually it went away. So for all I know, it could have just been stuff, scent blowing in from outside. But my wife is overly paranoid about stuff like that. So actually, we had a home remediator come in and take a look at everything. And he looked, all upstairs, all downstairs. And he's the one that actually mentioned, bleach is a cleaning material. He says the only thing bleach really does is it changes the color of your mold. He says it's not going to really kill anything, especially if you have something as bad as, black mold. He says it's not. People think that if you just use bleach, you're great. He says, but that's really not the case.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, like I said, I did the research and I found that bleach isn't always the sort of exterminator that people think it is.
Right.
Which is good to know, because it would suck if I just went on somebody's advice and then had all this bleach and all those bleach fumes, and because that stuff is more just, it isn't just necessarily that there's fumes, but you get it on your hand, any surface it touches, it practically destroys, at least on the surface of it. So yeah, that was probably a crisis averted.
I absolutely hate the smell of bleach. Heather likes to use it for damn near everything. Sometimes she'll wash the dishes and like soak some in bleach because she thinks she needs to, or she'll overdo the whites in bleach, and like I'll put a shirt on and I can just smell it, and it's just to me it's I hate the smell of it. I hate any real harsh chemical smell. It just bothers me.
Yeah.
And she has a tendency to use harsh chemicals. I don't know whether she's trying to kill me and collect the life insurance policy or what, but
yeah, right. And bleach is about as harsh as it gets, man.
Yeah. It's a really bad smell.
Yeah. So anyway, we were going to discuss .NET in this episode. And of course, that's a really broad topic. That's like discussing global politics, right? There's like so many different places to start. And I know that I've had a great interest in the transition from the previously numbered versions of .NET to what we're just now calling Core. But, before I get into that, I wanted to ask you something. Have you downloaded the update for .NET 4.6.2?
Yeah, I believe I do have 4.6.2 installed on my work computer.
All right. So just out of curiosity, I downloaded it because I do like to keep things updated. There's sometimes optimization benefits and, sometimes features, but, mainly I just do it because I like to be up to date. And so I was just kind of looking at a project, and it was like 4.6.1. And I was like, oh, let me just bump it up to 4.6.2 and just see what happens. I like to break things. And I actually can't, whether I'm starting a new project or just trying to update, an existing one, there's no presence of 4.6.2 acknowledged by my Visual Studio. I just think that's weird. I was curious if you had seen that.
I have not tried to. I think we're on 4.6. And I don't think we've tried to upgrade to any of the incremental versions, at least the projects that we're working on.
Right.
The deadlines that we tend to be under are very similar to, hey, here's a project, and by the way, we need it done by this date. So it kind of, and at the beginning we can experiment, but towards the end we can't.
Right.
With this newer project, I'll probably try to start with the latest version. It'll still be the .NET framework. It won't be Core, but we'll see what happens as far as whether or not we get the 4.6.2 to appear anywhere.
It's just a weird little thing I noticed.
And it could be such an incremental update that it doesn't even give you those options. I mean, kind of like the difference between 3.5 up to 4 versus 2.0 and all of those different. What's an actual full upgrade? Or a full Windows, almost a full Windows upgrade as it used to be versus the incremental updates.
Yeah, right. Because what version of .NET did that a long time ago? It was like 3.5 was still technically 4. So you just had to know that you were on 4 because it was like a superset of 3.5 or something like that. Sometimes .NET will do weird stuff like that.
Right. I think 3.5 might have been, and I'm probably completely wrong about this because it's been so long, but I think 3.5 might have been like a service pack update to 2, and then 4.0 was the new stuff, or it's vice versa.
Right. It was something like that.
You would think that a couple technology guys would remember it, but
there's so much to know. There's so much to remember.
I had the discussion like months ago, and I said that's not enough for me to file in my memory cache. So
right.
let me get rid of it.
I'll tell you this, I listen to shows, and there's so much in technology to just be aware of and little nuanced things to retain. There might be certain things I remember for whatever reason. If I listen to another tech show, there have been times where many times where I've listened to tech guys or girls get their facts wrong or mixed up, right? Like it's just, and really I remind myself that there's too much to memorize. Nobody could just know everything off the top of their head.
Right. I mean, absolutely. I mean, especially in technology. I mean, I remember when I was interviewing for a position at CCRI, one of the comments the guy made, he was like, "Look, I'm not looking to see if you're a superstar, Scala developer." He says, "I'm looking to see if you have the right mindset and the right capabilities to actually solve problems. I'll teach you how to, code in Scala." Which I mean, in Charlottesville, where I was looking, that's a good tack to take because you're not going to find many developers who write in that language. But ultimately, you're looking for problem solvers, and you're looking for people who can create solutions to these things, not necessarily be a superstar in every single language that's thrown at them. Because I mean, and I'm a big Python fan, and I do a lot of Python programming. But if I take 2 years off of really doing any hardcore Python stuff, I got to go back and I got to review some of the material and remember kind of how certain things were done. I'm just not going to remember it all, especially now that I have kids. I mean, I'm lucky if I can remember what I had for breakfast.
Yeah, man. Yeah, kids are just obviously require a lot of focus and attention. So
yeah, so 3.5, and I looked this up real quick. 3.5 is basically a service pack on top of 2.0. The way it's being delineated is that you have the CLR version versus the version number of .NET. So 3.5 sat on top of the CLR, the 2.0 version of the CLR, and then 4.0 was with the 4.0 CLR.
All right. So that's why still to this day, if you're in an application pull in IIS, you can pick between 4 or 2,
right?
Although really 2 is referring to 3.5.
Correct.
Yeah. See, so that I knew. Just you got to jog it up a little bit. That's all. But kind of bringing us back to where we're at now with .NET. I know that there was a lot of naming sort of decisions as they went through. Originally, I think it was like MDX and all these different things. I wasn't really following it at that point because I think I was so busy. Just kind of working with what were then the current tool sets, just 4.x, I guess 4.6, whatever. And, but as I started getting more into .NET Core, and I like how it's more broken out into components now. You get your obviously core set of components, and then you can kind of bring in whatever you need. Part of that includes, say, you want to build a web app. And it might have APIs, or it might have your standard view controllers in an MVC project, obviously. Really, although you can, of the project templates, you can pick one or the other, but they've actually combined those controllers because there was a lot of redundancy. So really you don't have to start a whole new project if you were like, oh, I started a web app, but I really just want some APIs in here. They're all kind of combined now. Obviously, yeah.
Right. They combined MVC and Web API, which was actually a good thing because the last project I was on, I had to actually create, you either create 2 separate projects or you create MVC and then you kind of poured over some of the Web API pieces.
Right.
And then later they offered an option to include Web API with your MVC, which added the additional Web API components, but did not apparently install the additional help component where they give you the little API help folder where you can actually list out the return JSON values and the XML values. And now with Core, they've kind of combined those two. But it's interesting because when they were talking about ASP.NET 5, back when it was referred to as that, and I understand why they did the name change. But people make fun of Microsoft because, you had Xbox 360, Xbox One, you had Windows 8, Windows 8.1, Windows 10, and now you're going from, ASP.NET 4 to, .NET Core 1. So they go back to the beginning, and, people make fun of Microsoft for those numbering conventions, but it made sense because I initially was under the impression that, and again, I worked with a proprietary framework. So although I was doing, some MVC stuff and I was doing some web form stuff, I wasn't staying up to speed at the time. But when they started talking about ASP, .NET 5, my assumption is it was just another incremental update of ASP.NET 4, and it's totally not the case at all. And I was surprised to hear that. So reverting, using the core terminology in their attempt to kind of, they made several attempts, right? So the attempt to streamline a lot of this stuff, the attempt to make it much more cross-platform, they wanted to decouple it from IIS. They wanted to have it very easy to create an application on Linux or a Mac environment. So they wanted to create a templating system that was open source and was cross-platform. And this, Core really became the beginning of a lot of, the full open source pieces of the components. And that's very different than what you have in the .NET framework. So that caused a lot of confusion early on.
Yeah, man.
And to this day, people don't realize, a lot of people are looking at ASP.NET Core, they're looking at the .NET Core framework, and they're looking at that and they're saying, okay, well, this is what Microsoft is moving towards, therefore the other stuff is obsolete. And that's not the case. They're actually they're going to continue to maintain, at least as far as I know they're continuing to maintain the .NET framework that is tied into the Windows operating system. System.web is not coming over. I think obviously WinForms is not coming over, and
No.
I don't think WPF is coming over either. It's just the universal Windows platform, correct?
That's right. So if you want to build like an x86 architecture application, you're still going to have to use the old or the prior, like, I don't want to call it, should we call it a version or just the sort of prior flavor? I don't know how you want to.
It's almost like they're almost like separate forks, right?
Pretty much,
I guess. I mean, I guess you could call them forks.
That's
different implementations, right? Can we call them? I guess we can call them different implementations of the .NET specification.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to go. And yeah, you're right. It's WPF, any of the traditional x86 sort of stuff you want to use. It's all kind of, you're going to have to go stick with the former version of .NET. See, I'm stuck. Version is like stuck in my brain.
Right.
But the implementation, and if you want to do, it's basically UWP. And just all their kind of like web component stuff, not web, but if you want to build non-IIS applications on the web, which is great, it's very interesting, but also I wonder if that disparity is going to cause some problems, because guys I talk to at work are turned off by that, and some people are turned off by the idea of having to build things in UWP.
Right. I mean, look, you have the .NET framework, you have .NET Core, and then of course you still have Mono, and Mono is still the engine that's inside of Xamarin. So now you have many multiple flavors, of .NET, and there's a lot of confusion about which one you should use, which one you should go to, what's available. I mean, they started with Core being just for web application development. And then they looked at it and they said, oh, well, we can bring, this item over, and then we can bring this item over. And then it stopped being about, just ASP.NET web application. And it started to be, this brand new open source implementation, cross-platform implementation of .NET. And so there's still a lot of, is this thing coming over? Is that? I mean, I think Signal R is still not available for Core. I think it might be in beta right now. And so and although .NET Core has been released, the tooling's still not there, correct? Is the tooling
right? It's still in beta,
right?
Yeah, the tooling is in beta. I think I think they finally released an official version of Entity Framework, which would be 7, but I think they renamed that the Entity Framework Core. Correct. That was in beta for up until very recently,
right?
And and a lot of other things. I mean, it's still so new that I wouldn't even blame anybody for thinking it's all still very beta feeling, because you mentioned the decoupling from IIS, and that was something I struggled with, because when I first built Core apps, and they hadn't yet really released a kind of Kestrel server that you could publish along with your .NET Core app.
Right.
So, and you can't, and since it was never built to just throw on IIS and run, you'd have to do a lot of configuration. It was very confusing. And one of the things that threw me off, and I actually got into, well, I wouldn't call it an argument, but David Fowler, one of the programmers for Signal R, I felt he was a little bit short with me, because I was just trying to understand why. Okay, so initially at one point, when you published out a .NET Core app, you would get 2 folders. You would get, and I'm trying to remember the name of them now. One was like web app, and I think I forget, but they're something like web and component app or something. Basically what it did was it broke out what would obviously now I think be www root in a Core app, and then all of your binaries and stuff were thrown in there,
right?
Were separated out, and now they just have all your binaries dropped right into the root. So you have like your dub root and all your other sort of whatever sort of system folders, your MVC stuff, and then right in there, instead of having a bin folder, you've got all those DLLs just right out there. And I was like, this can't be right. This just seems so poorly organized. So I went on Twitter, and I think Scott Hanselman actually kind of jumped in on there, and he sort of agreed with me. He said, no, that doesn't seem right. And then David Fowler got on and was kind of snarky. He was like, well, it's a console app, so it doesn't even make sense to reorganize. Well, first, I didn't know that, and that was another surprise, is when you're doing a web app in .NET MVC.NET Core, it's actually a console app, because now you have the whole hierarchy is more like a console app and not a traditional web app.
Right. And I remember that conversation because you had sent me the link and I followed up on it. And Hanselman wasn't the only person that actually kind of jumped in and kind of supported what you were saying. And I'm surprised, because Fowler is a relatively reasonable guy, and I've caught him on a couple of podcasts, and he seems, pretty happy-go-lucky, intelligent guy that seems very nice. But I was surprised that he was so short. Also, I don't know whether he had gotten a lot of pushback on that, or a lot of people asking about that, and it's kind of built up frustration with, a lot of maybe some of the team members over there. But I agree 100%. There's something to be said about a clean workspace, and a bunch of DLLs and a bunch of files kind of sitting in the root is kind of like a big that's a big programming no. I mean, if you look at a lot of other programming languages, they're all organized in such a way that they're very hierarchical, and to just take everything and throw it in the root just seems very odd. Regardless of whether it's a console application or not, there ought to be some better way to restructure things. And I think he threw in a comment of, oh, well, you could just move it all here and blah, but that's not anywhere. I mean, you're pushing this as something that's feature complete and something that's ready to be out there, and if there's no documentation on that, no discussion over that, that kind of causes problems with new developers, and it is going to be a turnoff. And if people don't understand completely how to use your new technology or program in your new language, they're just going to either go back to what they used to use that worked, or they're going to jump ship and go to something else. Right.
Yeah. And I brought it up. So he just makes a few comments, and he wasn't like being, aggressively mean to me. He was just sort of really short and said, I said, I don't understand. Again, I didn't even know that it was at that time a console app, because it's got, in there, when you start a .NET Core app now, you have your program CS file, and in there you've got your, static main method. I mean, that's how you run your normal, it's a console app, and that's cool. I just didn't know that. And he says, there's literally not an advantage to moving them to their own directory. It makes it harder to work on .NET Framework. It's inconsistent with regular console applications. He really laid into me, and it could have been solved by saying, I don't know, maybe I'm being ultra sensitive, but I just didn't understand it, and I was frustrated. And at the time, his answers came off sounding like just kind of pissy. And I was like, all right, well, whatever. And I didn't pursue it.
And this is not the only point of contention with ASP.NET Core, right? Because initially, when they decided that Core was just a web application framework, they did a project.json file in order to cut down on a lot of the overhead of the CS proj file and MS build. And that was okay at first, but now they're going back to the MS build and the project.json. I know I have my own opinion on this. I was curious as to your thoughts on the situation. I know you liked the project.json file and the way it set up references.
I do like it. Yeah. I had to learn it, and I can kind of see it's easy to sort of just type in your stuff, and then when you save it, it will automatically kind of pull in that those libraries.
Right.
So it's nice. I mean, having MS build in there. I mean, I don't have a strong opinion against MS build. I would like to see it, and if one or the other makes it more convenient or easier to work with, then I would just go there. But I like the project JSON. I think it's cool.
Yes. Yeah, so from my understanding, one of the reasons why they had to go back was because as they started to pull these other non-web app components into the .NET Core framework, they realized that they needed more pieces of functionality beyond just a list of references. And as they went over it and they started thinking towards their enterprise customers, there's a lot of functionality in MS Build that they would then have to port over to project.json. And there are a lot of customers who have built things on top of MS Build. And to them, as they looked at everything, they kind of looked at it and they said, well, you know what? It would be a lot easier to fold some of the project.json functionality, or at least some of the clarity or cleanliness of the project.json into MS Build. So they're attempting to find some, well, for one, they need to obviously make MS Build cross-platform, because I believe it might be cross-platform right now, but I believe that at the time it was Windows specific. And then they also have to make it so that you can just include a reference to a folder and a wildcard so that all items within it are included into your project, rather than each one, because in the XML for the CS proj file, each reference is listed individually as its own node. So every file is listed by itself, which is all fine and dandy when you're running Visual Studio. But if you're hand coding in something like, Visual Studio Code, right. Microsoft does push a lot that you can do, ASP.NET web apps in Core from the command line and from whatever utility you want, whether it's VS Code or whether it's, Atom or anything like that. They needed to make some concessions, and that's what they're trying to do, is fold those items back in. And MS Build had a ton of functionality. I mean, you could actually create an exec node that calls an external executable in order to process something. Between that and being able to run transforms and call different versions of DLLs, there's a lot of power built into it that not a lot of people use because not a lot of people understand. And the documentation for how to do all of these different things in MS Build is sparse, and they don't even create sparse, and they don't even whatever, and they don't even create a lot. I mean, there's not a lot of books published on it, anymore. So it's really kind of been lost in the wild, but there's a lot of enterprises that use it. And because of that, they kind of have to revamp some of the ideas of it and fold it back in, which I'm okay with. And I've heard that although the product.json file is great for references, it's kind of sloppy when it comes to a lot of the other pieces. I'm not a huge, I mean, I'm okay with JSON as a JavaScript object, and I'm okay with JSON as a small bit of configuration, but you and I have had this discussion before. I'm not a huge fan of large configuration files with JSON because to me, honestly, that's unreadable. But it's kind of interesting to see them backpedal a little bit, and that's caused a lot of friction in the community.
Yeah, and justifiably, because here's the thing: if somebody were to ask me, again, at this point, like, okay, I'm building a new web app. Should I do it in .NET Core? I understand that Microsoft wants to make this sort of the future of a kind of development platform, but I still don't think that it's ready. Like
Right.
it works. And if you took the time, as I have, to sit and try to understand the nuances and sort of battle through the changes that they make and they're still continuing to make, then sure, I mean, it'll work now. You can finally publish it to, like say, like I do on a virtual server, an IIS, and Kestrel will work fine. Using IIS is kind of like a man in the middle. So, yeah, it works fine, but there's gonna be a lot of things that you're just gonna be having to get up to speed on, and it's gonna be confusing because it could change. One of the things I think that I miss from just like a traditional, a prior implementation of .NET application was the ability to kind of have your XSL transforms for debug or production, where if you have different connection strings and stuff like that,
Right.
like that is gone. They in building it from the ground up, they had to remove a lot of things because, of course, and this is to kind of go back to something Scott Hanselman had said, .NET 6 or .NET 4 and prior has years and years and years of learning experiences and just built up to that point.
Right.
And with .NET Core being from the ground up again, things have to be rebuilt and has to work towards, again, a lot of those cool little tools that you got used to having. So you're going to miss out on a lot of that. And again, it's really kind of every day is sort of an adventure with .NET Core because you never know what they're going to change in an update.
Well, that's interesting. I wasn't aware that they had eliminated the transformations, and I wonder if that's something that they plan to fold back in, or maybe hopefully by the time this is released, maybe they have folded it back in. But I mean, I utilize that frequently, and in fact, I had to make a configuration change inside of the CS proj file to basically enable transformations on an MS build, because MS build. So interestingly enough, Visual Studio's publish mechanism will run those transformations. But if you are using Visual Studio Team Foundation server and you set up a production build and a test build and say a debug build or whatever sort of build definitions you want to do, the Visual Studio building inside of that build definition, which ultimately is just a tiny layer on top of MS build, does not actually make those transformations for you. So I actually had to go and track down several different pieces of code that people said would work, and none of them did until I finally found a formula that actually did work, where you run that transformation in the MS build and it'll basically create the new file and do the replacement.
Right.
So I mean, I had to do a lot of legwork just to get that to run within our build server, and for that to be taken away completely, I guess the assumption on their part is that you'll do simple replacement variables within inside your build server in order to get it done. But that seriously loses a piece of enterprise functionality, if you ask me.
It's a pretty big deal. I mean, like I said, it's something that I now it's just weird. Like when I publish now, and because I am doing it through a virtual server, just in this particular instance, like I'm basically just publishing out to a folder and then copying and pasting the whole entire thing, just drag and drop it over through a remote connection because, it's for one, it's kind of tough to set up a publish through that. In fact, probably impossible, right? You can't really set up a connection through like a publishing connection in Visual Studio through a remote desktop connection. I don't think that's possible. But yeah, so normally your web config would have, it'll collapse and you'll have your however many configurations you have for publishing out, right? You'd have your debug or your publish or whatever you want to name a custom one. Well, now the web config not only doesn't do that, I'm looking at mine now just from a clean project I'd started on. It's the web config's only 14 lines. And part of that is just some comments in there. It's like the web config is just completely nothing now.
I mean, that's to a certain extent, that's good. I'm assuming that now they just, anything that you need to add back in, you add back in. But that's part of the process that they kind of took with this, right? The original .NET was, here's everything that you ever need right now, and then we'll build it into the system because you don't want to carry that around with you.
Right.
And now with Core, it's like, well, here's the parts that you need to get started, and anything else you're going to build it, or you're going to pull in like a package. I mean, and it's to the point where even .NET in and of itself is a package. So I think the .NET command line utility for Core, when you create a new application, it essentially downloads the version of .NET that you're targeting and puts that in the well, obviously not the bin since everything's a console application, but it basically, puts that in with all of your dependencies, as well as, all of the other DLLs. So it's this kind of package management deal. And I mean, we talk about ease of use, and they're trying to make things a little bit easier. But if you follow the documentation that they have on Core, they talk about, using basically needing Grunt because you're using, or needing Node because you're using Grunt in it, but you're also using Yeoman to generate the ASP.NET Core templates. And it seems like there's a lot of moving parts that your brand new beginner developer, isn't going to be able to jump onto right away.
No, not at all. There's a lot of moving parts. I mean, and now you're talking about if you want to get your, because you have your project JSON, which is basically your project configuration, but then there's your package JSON. That's how you're going to pull your libraries in, all of your other dependencies. The web config, and you're right, the web config is empty. There's nothing in there except for some handlers for whatever, but it's nothing in there because basically the web config was just your IIS config. And since .NET Core doesn't use IIS, really, I mean, it doesn't use it, but it'll Kestrel will talk to it, but there's no reason for a web config, honestly, because that's where all your settings were. And then of course, if you want to use a TypeScript, there's a bunch of stuff. In fact, I was going through, what I've been trying to do is set up an Angular 2 TypeScript project. And let me tell you the nightmare that's been, get everything set up. Mads Christensen, actually, I saw today, released it's a plugin for, it's like ASP.NET, like core templates or something like that. And you can go get it in the, the extensions and updates inside of Visual Studio. And in there is an Angular, like an Angular TypeScript template. So it'll pull down all the files that you need, all the configurations inside of your package JSON, your project JSON. There's a Docker file in there. It has all the stuff because I've been going through manually trying to add all these things in. And depending on what site you're on, what person prefers, say, Grunt or Gulp. Ironically, Mads Christensen doesn't use either. He uses Webpack, which is another sort of like...
Yeah, that's a newer one that people are navigating to.
So he's putting Webpack in there. So now if you want to do your bundling, minification, task management kind of configuration, there's your third option. So it's like there's so much. And because of this modularity, that's what you're going to run into. And it almost, in a way, well, not in a way, it directly almost creates the same problem that front-end developers have with a new library every week. And because of that, there's just the modularity now means everybody's going to come up with their own solution and say it's the best solution, and you can't go anywhere on the site and find some sort of standard to say I just want to do an Angular 2 TypeScript, project that follows best practices. Well, best practices practically don't exist, so good luck.
And it's unfortunate that documentation is not, I mean, their documentation is better now than when you and I were younger developers, especially with open source projects, but it's still not moving as fast as the development is. I mean, the other day I was working on a publishing application in Node, and I was using TypeScript, and I needed to pull in the type definitions for Node, the core of Node, so that I could access all those pieces because I like to write in TypeScript. And the documentation that I had initially found, like the several pieces of certain material I found, when searching in a search engine, all pointed to a different. So now you use the at types. So you can basically say npm install, the at simple types / whatever it is you're looking for. So node in this instance, or basically so
Angular 2 does it.
Right. So they're using those symbols to basically say, oh, you need that thing. I know what that thing is, and it'll download it, and it downloads the type definitions for you. Well, unfortunately, the instructions that I found were pointing to a node.d.ts, and since those things and after apparently they had made a change since then. Now there's a node folder with an index.d.ts, and nobody told me that. So I'm like, well, it still isn't working. So now I have to actually go and look at the files themselves. And actually, put those files, put the pathing in correctly. It can be a real pain. I mean, we live in interesting times, but I mean, things are moving so fast that, again, and everybody has their own solution. It does make it difficult. Now we have .NET Framework. I mean, we have .NET Core, and of course, I mentioned Mono. But we also have the .NET Standard now too. Have you read up anything on that?
No, I'll be honest with you, man. This is the first time even hearing of it. So
the .NET Standard is basically a set of APIs, in the original, not a web service API, but the original term for API, to application programmer interface, that basically are ways for people to target. You would target the .NET Standard so that you knew that your DLL or your library would then work on .NET Framework, .NET Core, or Mono. So it's this kind of added layer of abstraction and compatibility. And there are different versions of the .NET Standard that allow for different versions of the framework versus core. It's kind of their way of saying, look, we know that some things are different in core versus the framework. So how are we gonna fix this? And they're doing the .NET Standard as part of that. And I think I'm trying to remember the exact example, and I'm going to get this wrong, but I remember listening to somebody's podcast where basically they were, and I'm going to use this as an example. This is probably not the correct namespace, or I'm probably wrong about this, but I'm going to just, let's say, for example, system.io.file system. There's some example floating out there where basically that is not in the system.io DLL. It's like in a different DLL, and like there's some weird namespacing compatibility things where they pulled some items out and they put it in other packages or in other DLLs where it doesn't quite make sense, and it's causing obviously people's programs to break. So I think this .NET Standard is kind of a way to say, look, we know that a lot of your stuff's going to break. However, if you just target the standard, it'll work on these different versions, and then you'll be okay. Yeah. So I'm not sure how much they've accomplished thus far, but the standard is basically the big thing that they're moving towards, to kind of add this layer to say, look, we know we have many different implementations of .NET. However, if you target the standard, then you will be able to target all of these different platforms.
Oh, that's not bad. I like that, actually. It's a good idea.
What about the .NET Foundation? Have you heard much about that?
No.
So this is
where are you gonna? Is this like? Where are you looking to get this? Like I have so many different dev things in my feed. I have heard nothing of this.
A couple of, I mean, again, I drive an hour and 15 minutes to work and back, so I listen to a lot of podcasts, and there are several, like, I mean, .NET Rocks is a pretty good one. MS Dev Show, Jason Young's pretty nice guy. Carl Schweitzer. And various other podcasts that I listen to. And also, they basically give you, a little bit of information and then a bunch of links. And then I go through link. And next thing you know, I wasted 3 hours at work looking up stuff totally unrelated. But the .NET Foundation is actually an independent group. Obviously sponsored by Microsoft, but it's an independent foundation whose purpose is to basically maintain .NET kind of as a whole. And you can apply. You can actually. We could apply, although we don't have any .NET software. That's a library. But if you basically had a program that a lot of people used, that was a .NET library or .NET program, and it was something that you basically weren't going to be able to maintain. You can apply for it to go into the .NET Foundation, and basically .NET Foundation supplies individuals or companies with various assurances. And so like if for some reason you're unable to maintain it, they like find a way to have it continue to be maintained through the community. They offer, I believe, I think they offer law services as far as determining what the right licenses are and things like that. So basically it's a group of individuals as a foundation attempting to keep .NET and a .NET community on the right track. I probably got like half of that wrong, but
no. I mean, as you were explaining, I went to the site and I looked it up, and I mean, it's just .netfoundation.org,
right?
And then that's pretty much it there. It's someone's like an open source community, and you kind of, or not open source community, but it's like one, and there are projects where you can get involved, or probably I guess you could submit your own. So, and there's definitely, I mean, GitHub's a part of it, so there is obviously that open source component. It's a really good idea, and I love that Microsoft is making the push to do more for developers than just jump up and down on a stage screaming their name.
Microsoft is the number one committer of open source projects, or of projects in general, on GitHub.
Yeah.
That's just the oddest thing that's ever come out of my mouth, I think. But
it's really weird.
They really get it now. I mean, they get what they're trying to do. They understand what they want to do with the community, as a company, and they're building up a lot of goodwill because of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's really weird from the perspective of, say, 10 years ago, but now with Satya Nadella and all the things he's doing to turn the company around, it makes total sense, and this is really less to do with like .NET or really anything code related, but and of course, to be fair, take it with a grain of salt. This is according to Microsoft's own, what they say their estimates are, but they said that they have a trade-in program for Mac to get Surface.
Right.
And like a Surface Book or just a regular Surface Pro 4. And they said that there's been a huge uptick. A lot of people are trading in their old Macs to get Surfaces. And what they attributed to is the sort of lukewarm reception that the new MacBooks have gotten. And that basically people seem to find the Surface line of products more appealing in terms of doing the things that they wanted to do. And I'm only bringing that up just to say that, again, who would have thought, because a lot of people are saying this, if you listen to podcasts, you read news, that the new Surface Studio and the Surface Pro, and people are excited about the Surface 5 that's, rumored to be coming out along with the Surface phone. People are genuinely excited about what Microsoft is offering. And that's a big deal. And it's hard not to attribute that turnaround to the leadership at Microsoft. And that's great. That's great news.
I mean, if you followed the last couple of, Apple events, over the last few years on Twitter, it went from a bunch of people who are just huge Apple enthusiasts and journalists that, worship at the cult of Mac. And then as each year over the last couple has progressed, you get the snarkier and snarkier tweets that are coming through. And as people basically poke fun at the non-innovation, and not, and I'm not trying to knock Apple in any way, but there's a huge difference between when with Tim Cook running it versus when Steve Jobs was, and you're starting to see that. You're starting to see the ideas go away, and you saw the uptick in ideas at Microsoft, and I remember when there was some concern, at least in the Microsoft community and the Windows community. Yeah, Windows was still all over the enterprise, but if you went to a college campus, all of these kids had Macs. They had their iPhones, they had their iPads, they all got a bunch of Macs because, that's the cool thing to do. And even if you go to, where I work, you see a lot of faculty members with Macs, you see a lot of students with Macs. And this last year, I noticed there are a lot more I see in Surface Pros. I'm seeing Surface Books. I'm now seeing, administrators and staff who, when they want to place their, put their order in, they're ordering the Surface Books. They're not ordering the MacBooks. You're starting to see that paradigm shift on universities, which obviously that's different than out in the real world. But if Apple hasn't yet not beaten the door down to the enterprise world, and all they did was take over universities for a time, and now it's swinging back. I mean, that's a bad sign for Apple, but I mean, it's a good sign for Microsoft. They've focused on cloud. They focused on, mobile first. They're making every bit of tool they can find. Not just trying to make it open source, but also making it cross-platform. And ultimately, they've tried. I mean, the Windows Phone is still they still don't know what they want to do with that. but the Surface Pros they stuck with. I mean, the regular Surfaces were failures, but they stuck with the Surface Pros. They finally got us, success with the Surface Pro 3. Then they just, took that success and rammed it into the 4 in the book, and they've really taken off. And it's been great to see.
And what was it? I forget the name now. You just mentioned. So the original Surface came out. You had the Surface Pro, and then the Surface. What was the sort of ARM version?
That was the regular Surface. So it
was a regular Surface, but now with Microsoft just recently announcing that they've built Windows 10 to be able to run on ARM chips. That brings back the regular Surface again. That actually makes them they're relevant now. And kind of going back to the mobile thing, I think one of the things, one of the guys I worked with just went to an MS a Microsoft convention down in Florida. And one of the things that they're pushing is not only the big announcement was having Windows 10 function on ARM chips, but also the push they're making with Continuum. Right. And for people who don't know what Continuum is basically you could take a Windows mobile device and you can plug it into other peripherals, a mouse, a keyboard, a monitor, and basically your mobile device is now just a small computer, and you can have a normal screen, a normal mouse, a normal keyboard, and with the ability then with Windows 10 to run on ARM devices, it basically means an ARM device can run Visual Studio, and you can have your phone with you, and you can kind of plug it into a mouse keyboard. And here's what's interesting to me. If they really push HoloLens correctly, you now have, with a phone and a HoloLens, basically a portable, machine that will run kind of complex software as you wear this device.
And you will never get laid again.
Fortunately, I got married, so I don't have to worry about that. I lucked out. But think about the ramifications of that. So say people wanted to do a Skype meeting and do a presentation or see a presentation, or however, I mean, obviously you can conjure up all kinds of scenarios, but just with the phone, you can throw on a pair of HoloLens and have an interactive Skype meeting. And again, that's if they push the technology right.
And they're calling them, the term that they're using is cellular computers, I think. So they're almost trying to not necessarily brand it as a phone or exclusively as like a mobile device in the same set or in the same category as phones. And I think this was the guys from not Windows Central. Paul Thurrott, I think, him and his
Mary Jo Foley.
No, Thurrott and his partner that writes for him on his site. I think I heard it from them, where basically they're trying to brand these as cellular computers in order to have a new terminology, and they're basically acknowledging that you rarely use your cell phone to actually call people anymore. It is a mobile computing device, and the moment we can put on there everything that you want, and it's powerful enough, and you can just plug it into a monitor and go. I mean, how far off are you? Look how small a lot of these, Surface Pros are to begin with.
Yeah.
What's the difference between a Surface Pro versus a phablet? The form factor. It's just shoving more information. What's your battery life like? And can you run, is your processor speed and memory good enough? So we're getting there.
Now, the question I would wonder though is, and apparently the guy did a demo at this convention where he pulled out his phone and used Continuum to run Visual Studio. So that's not an idea I came up with. That was actually a scenario that had happened at this convention.
Right.
My one question, of course, is, okay, Visual Studio, does require some memory to run on an ARM processor. It's not very powerful. That's why the battery life on those things are so good. I would be curious to see what kind of projects I'd be running in a Visual Studio environment on an ARM phone. But maybe they figured it out.
Hey, if you can run Visual Studio on your cell phone, you can power your entire car with it. So I mean, that's probably the heftiest piece of resource unless you're doing photo editing.
Yeah, I was gonna say, other than video and photo
editing, that's probably the most intensive piece of software you're gonna use. But it's fantastic news for Microsoft, and the beauty of this is to kind of tie this back into what we're talking about with .NET. There was concern several years ago when Windows 8 launched, because you could build those tiled applications, the UWP applications, with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and an API backend, and Microsoft was trying to get in on the Node train in order to not miss the boat on it. You had this scenario where it had looked like Microsoft was going to abandon .NET and abandon C#, and some developers were concerned. And this kind of, the ASP.NET Core, if it has done anything, it has helped to revitalize the community and revitalize Microsoft's commitment to .NET and to the .NET framework and to developers in general of more robust applications, and then purchasing Xamarin and bringing that into the tool set has been a huge, and then Visual Studio Code,
Right.
allowing you to run these applications on Macs. And I mean, even the new beta of Visual Studio for Mac is just an incredible commitment to hardcore development and .NET and C# in general. So that was a really good swing as far as, being concerned of the demise of .NET and C# to being re-energized, regardless of whatever failings it's currently experiencing, as far as Microsoft changing its mind and developers changing its mind, all the various growing pains. I mean, to me, this is huge.
Yep. Nope. Couldn't agree more.
So you got any last words for us?
That's all I got.
Sounds good. All right, man. So I will talk to you next time.
Yep. Take care, everybody.
That's it for this episode of Codepunk. You can subscribe to this podcast on Google Play, iTunes, and Stitcher, or listen to it on the web at codepunk.io. You can find Bill on Twitter at Northustra and Michael on Twitter at Zool.